Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about the optimization of 5, 6, 7, and 8 speed transmissions. Now there's an equation for all of them that works that I have kind of fine-tuned to make universal. The only difference amongst each of these different transmissions is that you have to determine the multiplier for each of them. That is the most important variable in the equation. And in order to determine the multiplier, you must do 1 divided by the number of gears minus 1 over 1 over the number of gears minus 1 times 10, and that equals the multiplier. Now, for instance, if we have a 5-speed gearbox, it would be 1 divided by 5 minus 1, so 1 over 4 times 10 will equal our multiplier, and we're going to go over that in a second. I have a 5-speed gearbox right here that I'm going to be going over with you guys, as well as a 6, 7, and 8-speed gearbox. Alright, so we have certain conditions that apply. Before any adjustments to the individual gears, you have to mid the final gear first, and then do the same to the auto set speed option. So what that means is this: for the final gear, before you do any adjustments, let me go to the stock manual transmission right here. Before you do any adjustments, you have to get the final gear and bring that to the median. You could figure it out by doing 5.5 plus 2.5 and divide that by 2, or you could just, line up this dot with the middle marker there, and that's 4.0. And then you take the auto set speed option and you bring that to the middle as well. Now the other steps include no matter how many gears the transmission has, this is going to be B right here. And so no matter how many gears the transmission has, always minimize the first gear and maximize the last gear. This allows for progressively shorter gearing from the longest first gear to the shortest last gear, granting optimum overall acceleration and grip relative to vehicle speed. So basically, you're going to take this, you're going to slide it all the way to the left for the first gear. No matter how many gears the transmission has, if it's 5 gears or 60 gears, if you're driving like a truck or something. And then, last gear you'll slide that all the way to the right. I can't really speak English today. And then C condition is using the formulas in step 1. You're now ready to begin precisely optimizing the gears. After optimization, use only the final gear ratio to adjust top speed from now on. This is because using the auto set speed option afterwards will reset all of your optimized values. So I'll demonstrate that to you guys now. Since I've already optimized this gearbox, I will watch what happens when I press X on this. See how it resets all the values? Only when I press X again and confirm that choice will those changes be permanent, but I'm pressing circle so I could toggle. This is the stock transmission, fully customizable kit, and this is the optimized transmission. Now as you can see in the graph that all the gear ratios are closer together and they're all in proportion to one another, as opposed to the stock one, which they all are pretty wide and tall, and they're not very proportionate to one another, which creates certain deficits in acceleration, and it's not all as good as it could be. Now obviously, in everyday thing, like for a civilian vehicle, having the ultimately optimized transmission isn't really necessary because you're not racing and fractions of a second don't matter. But when you talk about being in a racing scenario, every fraction of a second matters, and the amount of time it takes for a gear to shift, or the engine bogs down in RPM when you have a broken gear or something, that can greatly affect acceleration and even top speed. So now let's go to the 5-speed little thing that I made for you guys. 5-speed optimization. We went over making the final gear option in the middle, and then we minimize the first gear and maximize the 5th gear. And since the number of gears equals 5, we take that equation above that I talked about earlier, this one right here, the 1 divided by the number of gears minus 1 times 10 equals your multiplier, because I said that was the most important variable in your equation. So this, in this case, is a 5-speed gearbox, so that's 1 divided by 5 minus 1 times 10, that equals 2.5. So 2.5 is your multiplier, right? So for first gear, that's the minimum. We did that. Now for second gear, you take the maximum value minus the minimum value. Okay, so let's look at that here. So in this case, and you can do the math with me, check my math. This would be 1.826 minus 1.399. And then you would divide that by 10, right? You would divide that by 10. Then you would multiply that by 2.5. So in this equation here, you would divide the maximum minus minimum by 10, then multiply that by the multiplier, 2.5 by 10. You multiply it by this together, not separately, because order of operations matters here. And then you add that value that you get from this part of the equation to the minimum here, and that will equal your optimum ratio. So when you do that math, the number you'll get with these ratios is 1.506. I always round up if significant figures determine whether it should be the next whole number or not. And third gear is going to be right smack dab in the middle, because with this equation, basically you can visualize, just watch the dot. Like, you see the dot is all the way to the left there. The dot is in the middle from extreme left and the middle of the actual, right here. And then, at third gear, the dot's in the middle. And fourth gear, it's in the middle of the middle and, the maximum. And then we have fifth gear, which is, all the way to the right. So progressively shorter gearing to compensate for, grip relative to vehicle speed and acceleration. Because, the faster you go, the harder and harder it is to accelerate smaller and smaller amounts. So this way you compensate for that, and you have nice even acceleration throughout the entire gearbox. There are other factors, like if your car has a turbocharger, obviously you might not want your first gear to be this long, because when shifting to second gear and stuff like that, because the turbo might not kick in until I don't know how many or whatever RPM range the turbo kicks in. It might take a little bit with that turbo lag because the gear is so long. But this is, again, like a universal kind of thing that you guys can then do whatever you want to kind of fine tune to your vehicle. So if you're in a Nissan GTR or something that relies heavily on turbo power, you could slide this up, pretty far to compensate for that turbo lag. But it's a 5-gear transmission. And after you do all of that, actually I have to go over 2.5 is the multiplier you need for second gear. Third gear, however, the thing is this. So for second gear, we did max minus min over 10 times 2.5 by 10, right? And we added that to the minimum value to get our optimum ratio of 1.506. However, it is not the same multiplier for the third gear, because in order to keep everything proportionate, to keep everything going further to the right, we have to add the multiplier to itself each gear that we go up. So for second gear, it's at 2.5, but for third gear, the multiplier becomes 5, as you see there. Okay, so 2.5 plus 5 is 5, 5 plus 2.5 is 7.5, and so on, to keep to keep it getting closer to the right, going from minimum to maximum. Okay, and now we're going to look at a 6-speed transmission. The principle is exactly the same, except this is a lot easier, I guess you could say, because you're not dealing with decimals in this case, because in this case the multipliers go from 2, 4, 6, 8, right? So I'm going to demonstrate I'm going to show you one I've already optimized, actually. All of my vehicles have optimized transmissions. So let's find one with 6 gears. I think this has 7 gears, right? Yeah, it has 7 gears. I believe this has 6 gears. I'm not exactly sure, though. Yep, 6 gears. Okay. Now, I had this extremely stretched out because this is kind of like a top speed kind of tune, but the gearbox is still optimized. And as you can see, I mean, look at how beautiful that graph is. I'm going to click on the default values, and you see the difference there. That is, that's a major difference, in time accelerating and everything with these two graphs. This is, horribly optimized, and then this is just perfect. So yeah, the principle is the same. So obviously, first gear all the way to the left. Second gear, you do the equation, and this time our multiplier is 2. Because number 1 over number of gears minus 1 times 10, and then you get your multiplier. So in this case, you have a 6-speed gearbox, so that's 1 divided by 6 minus 1, which is just 5. 1 over 5 times 10 is 2. And then you take your multipliers and you scale them proportionately. So for second gear, the multiplier is 2. For third gear, the multiplier is 4, 4, 6, 5th, 8th, and so on. And so that's for 6-speed. We'll do a 7-speed optimization. Now, 7-speed and 8-speed, you're going to see a lot of decimals. So I took the liberty of already giving you guys the values here. So maybe I'll just hover over the 7-speed and 8-speed. So maybe you could screenshot the video and use this to help you out with optimizing your gearboxes. So that's a 7-speed. And this is for like the Lewis Hamilton's 2017 F1 car, because that has 8 gears. So if you want to optimize that gearbox, here are all the multipliers for it, and just follow the equation and plug everything in, and you should be good. Because I already rounded everything to the significant figures for these multipliers, so you don't have to worry about that, because obviously these are all irrational decimals, and they repeat infinitely because math is math. Alright, and so that was 6 gears. I'm gonna go to my favorite car now. I really want the fan car, like in Gran Turismo 6. I used to pull like 3-minute 41-second laps on the Nordschleife with the fan car in GT6, but in this game they're all about, oh, well, it's supposed to be more realistic, or whatever the case may be. I mean, but it's still Gran Turismo. Why doesn't Kazunori have his like iconic insane dream car in his game? Like, come on, man. Anyway, for a 7-speed, it's the same principle. In this case, the multiplier is a decimal, but do not worry, because I did the math for you already, and these are all your multipliers. And you don't have to worry about, plugging it into your calculator over and over again. So I will demonstrate to you, like, the same thing. This is all the way to the left. This is a little more to the right, because this is all precise. Though this isn't just because some people like to eyeball it. I hate eyeballing things because that kind of like messes with my OCD. I want something mathematically like precise, so these are all precise values. Well, as precise as you can be with rounding, because some of them are like irrational and you have to either round up or keep the whole number. And this one's in the middle because that's fourth gear. You know, you have 3 gears before fourth gear and 3 gears after fourth gear, so this ratio is in the middle of the scale. Then fifth gear, you know, and sixth gear and seventh gear all the way to the right. And that way you maximize acceleration and vehicle grip. And when I go for the default values, you can see how much more the graph spreads out. You know, the gears are just much closer and they're all much more, you know, the actual shifting times don't change, but the time you save, like, because if you have a broken gear, for instance, like, let me make this just absolutely ridiculous. So let me go to seventh gear, right? And let me make seventh gear all the way to the left. You can see how broken that gear is. So you're going to be really fast with acceleration from first to sixth gear. But the second you go from sixth to seventh gear, it's going to be like woo, 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 woo. And then, like, can you like imagine that? Like, you might laugh or like think it's silly me making those noises, but the engine is going to sound like, you know, it'll bog down because that gear is so broken. You know, it's, you know, so that's why this way of optimizing your gearbox pretty much is idiot proof. You know, again, you can fine tune it for like a turbocharged vehicle, like a Nissan GTR with a lot of turbo lag, with really long gears. You could, you know, make the first gear, you know, extremely short if you would want it to be. Well, not actually short, but just, I guess, more this way, as you can see, so that you don't have that turbo lag. Because the more you bring the slider to the left, the more torque that gear will have. And in the beginning, you want as much torque as you can produce, because it's better to have more torque to start a mass, to start accelerating a mass, than it is to have a lot of power to start accelerating a mass. Because if you try to, how do I analogize this? Like, if you try to, like, you just have too much wheel spin. I'll just say that. You have too much wheel spin on most vehicles if your gear does not have enough, if your first gear does not have enough torque. So that's another factor of, you know, so the further you go to the right, the more basically power or like overdrive you have when shifting gears. Because these gear ratios, the drive shaft is spinning slower than the engine, right? And then around like 5th to 7th gear, the drive shaft starts to spin faster than the engine because the gears are overdriven. The gears are smaller than the input gear. There's a lot of mechanics and, you know, power loss between each of the gears and stuff, but the point is, you know, this is, you know, the most optimum, like, kind of result that you can possibly hope to get with how we engineer vehicles and take advantage of their power with gearing. Power and torque, rather. And, you know, the more torque, really, the more acceleration. That's like a general rule of thumb. Now let me go to an 8-speed vehicle, because I want to show you guys an 8-speed gearbox. So this is Lewis Hamilton's F1W08. I'm not actually sure if this is the debut version of the vehicle or if this is like the vehicle at the end of the F1 season after it had all its aero upgrades and everything. I'm not sure. I actually think this is kind of the debut model of his F1 car, because I'm not seeing all the kind of little aerodynamic updates I saw watching the F1 season in 2017. Because around when we got to Sao Paulo and everything, it was a lot more developed with the shark wing here and the T-wing and the little monkey basket in the back too. And the barge boards actually, I think, had some different elements going on than what you see here in the Gran Turismo model. But, it's just a bunch of polygons. The actual figures for performance, I'm sure, are derived from the updated model, so that's inconsequential, although maybe a little disappointing. Because I would have loved to have the updated, like, fully, maxed out in efficiency, F1 car rather than its debut model. But here the principle is the same with the 8-speed gearbox. So let me go to, here we go. So the 8-speed optimization, the multiplier here is 1.429, and you guys already get the drill with all, what has to be done. And so, there it is all the way to the right, and obviously the more gears you have, the less that dot will move to the right, in proportion to how many gears you have. So let me compare my optimized gearbox with the stock gearbox, because it's already an F1 gearbox, so it's already pretty well optimized, and so this is, according to Gran Turismo, the stock gearbox of the F1 W08. And as you can see, they have very short, very quick gearing in the beginning for that acceleration, and then they kind of draw out the gearing near the end. To kind of, I don't really know why, but they do that, and then they kind of break the 8th gear a little bit. As you can see, the 8th gear is just a little bit broken. Not drastically, but it's a little bit broken. Because really, even though the F1 cars have 8 gears, they really have 7 gears, and the 8th gear is kind of like this double clutch thing, because, like, it's weird to explain, because, you could see how close my 8 gear is. This is the stock gearbox, this is what I did to it. And, like, the 8th gear is not, first of all, look at this. It goes from 191 to 258 miles an hour. Now, obviously, an F1 vehicle isn't going to get nowhere near 260 miles an hour because of the immense drag it produces. Despite its weight and power, it's trying to fight too much drag to even get close to 260 miles an hour. But that gear, that 8th gear, is like an overdrive gear. It's like a double clutch kind of thing, where it's not like it's like you have a 7-speed gearbox, and then you have an 8th gear from like another gearbox that comes in, and like, because you see how far that 8th gear, it goes way out of the graph like that. And on any other car, if you look at the final gear of any other car, like I'll look at the final gear of this Red Bull standard car, right? You can see that the final gear here, the final gear doesn't go off the scale like that. So for like the F1 W08, that 8th gear is like some kind of like special weird, gear that's like not part of the same gearbox is what I imagine. I think it's kind of like the inverse of the first gear, because you see how long the first gear is. You can theoretically, scale that down, infinitely, and then they took that, basically flipped it for the 8th gear, and then it scales infinitely, the other direction. So I thought that was, pretty cool. But yeah, take screenshots of, these equations and stuff that I made for you guys. It all works. You can test it out yourself, and like I said, fine tune it based off of the vehicle. Like if it has turbo lag, make the first gear shorter and to compensate for that turbo lag. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you made it till the end, through me blabbering on about all this stuff, I suggest you subscribe, and that would be awesome because I produce my own music. I do a lot of, I guess you could say, out of the box kind of things like this. My channel really doesn't have any kind of upload consistency and like what kind of content I produce, but subscribe if you, I guess if you like that kind of thing. And I hope you have a wonderful day or night.